Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Solid topic? Let's do it. What's your creepy and most unsettling story? Creep me out, Reddit. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. The one thing that happened to me that I will never be able to put into a logical explanation is the one time I was brushing my teeth in my old house, and a plastic cup holding a few toothbrushes lifted itself up and jolted towards me. This happened in my old home. Me and my brother had always felt something was weird about the house. We've experienced minor things before, like noises, voices, guitar strings plucking themselves, door handles jiggling, TVs turning on overnight. But seeing that cup lift itself up and move in an intelligent way on its own really turned me into a believer of the unknown. I know it's not much, but the thought of it still sends shivers down my spine every time I picture it in my head. I have since moved from the house. I was 17 when it happened, and I was completely sober, and the last thing I was concerned with was ghosts before it happened. I literally ran into my room, closed the door, and called my girlfriend and stayed on the phone with her for 2 hours before I finally went to sleep. This isn't paranormal, but I was almost abducted. I was in Indiana with 3 friends for a birthday party, 4 hours from where I live in 6th grade. We were messing around, riding around the town on bikes and stuff of the sort. We came upon this secluded basketball court. This old guy comes out of a house next to us and begins to lurch over to us. He asks us where we live and if we would like to ride with him to the local ice cream parlor. My friend began to tell him where we were staying, but I cut him off and said that we have to go. We ran back to a main road without looking back, but when I finally did look back, I saw him, slowly lurching after us. To this day, every time I think of him and his stained wife beater, I get chills. About 7 years ago, during my middle school days, I often had to wait at school for an hour or more since I couldn't take the bus home. Instead, I had to wait to be picked up. To pass the time, I would frequently spend my time on the side of the school, watching cars pass by and occasionally spotting a stray cat. I've always liked cats, and it turned out that the man who lived next door to the school did too. One day, when I attempted to pet one of the strays I found, the cat ran over to the man's house. This encounter marked the first time we introduced ourselves. He mentioned that he had noticed me hanging around the school's edge quite often, especially when I wanted to pet some of the strays. The man explained that many strays visited his home because he regularly left food out for them. He kindly invited me to come over and enjoy their company. I declined initially, partly due to the impending pickup time and also because I had been warned about strangers. However, in the following days, the man repeatedly asked if I'd like to come over. Being an animal lover, I couldn't resist the opportunity to play with kittens instead of waiting in a parking lot. He led me to his back porch, where several cats came and went, although some were a bit cautious around me. As I was about to reach out to pet one of the cats and ask a question, the man placed a finger to his lips and whispered, "They'll run away if you make a noise." I nodded and watched in silence. Eventually, a few of the braver or curious cats came closer, allowing me to pet them. This soon became my afternoon routine on weekdays. However, as my middle school days neared their end and I was about to move on to junior high, the man asked if I would still visit him and the cats. I expressed uncertainty, mentioning that my parents might not allow it. His expression turned stern, and we didn't speak much after that. Subsequently, whenever I came to play with the cats, he never came outside. On my final day of waiting at the middle school grounds, I knocked on the back porch door one last time to say goodbye. To my surprise, there were no cats around the porch this time. It wasn't the same man who answered the door. He appeared much younger, though I could see similarities. He clarified that he was the sole resident apart from his father, who had lived there before him. He informed me that his father had passed away at least 20 years ago. I questioned if he was joking, but he didn't find it amusing. I excused myself and left, realizing it was time to move on. Years passed, and I started to believe that I had imagined the entire experience out of boredom. A group of friendly cats had certainly been more interesting than sitting in a parking lot. Still, I couldn't explain why I had never met the older man's son before. I eventually forgot about it until my family decided to move from our neighborhood to a place closer to the high school I was attending. Coincidentally, we moved into the house next to the one where the old man had lived, reigniting my thoughts about the situation. During my first few nights in the new house, I wrestled with thoughts about what was real and what wasn't. Each night, my contemplations were interrupted by the faint meowing of a sickly-sounding cat. I would sit up in bed instantly scanning the room, but I never saw anything aside from the empty space in my new room. I started to believe it was all in my head. After several nights without hearing the cats, I finally came to relax and try to sleep peacefully, assured that it was a product of my imagination. Then, one night, I heard the cats sound again, but this time it was closer than ever. I sat up, convinced I wasn't imagining it this time. As I looked to the corner of the bedroom, I saw the old man with his back to me, kneeling over a small orange tabby. I was rendered speechless and unsure of what to do until he turned to look at me. Our eyes locked and he placed a finger to his lips. "They'll run away if you make any noise." I'm certain this wasn't a dream because I was engaged in a conversation. I might have been hallucinating due to sleep deprivation, but this has never occurred before or since. I was on the phone while lying in bed when something on my desk fell over. I think it was a cup. It might have been due to the wind. My blinds were swaying, and I initially dismissed it. However, I later realized that my windows were closed, yet they were moving as if pushed and pulled by the wind. I found this odd. My TV turned off on its own, and, being a skeptic, I thought it was just a sleep timer. I turned the TV back on, but my direct TV box wasn't working. Upon inspection, I realized both were unplugged. Surprisingly, the TV remained on, displaying the line screen due to it being an old TV. This made me uneasy. I decided it was time to go to sleep. As soon as I turned off to the TV, a loud noise ensued. Everything on my desk, cups, deodorant, lamp, etc., toppled over in the same direction towards the door. I yelled in shock, hung up with my person I was talking to, and rushed out of my room. Oh my god, what the hell? Was that enormous gust of wind, or am I hallucinating? I opened the door, and my blinds were no longer moving, but they were open, revealing that the windows were indeed closed. I scanned the room and everything was facing me as if it had fallen in that direction. This creeped me out, so I decided to get some water and use the bathroom. A friend called back asking, "What happened? Are you okay?" After returning from my trip, I headed back to my room explaining, yes, everything on my desk got knocked over by a strong gust of wind, and I didn't want anything to break. The noise startled me. Upon opening the door, my friend began saying something, but I interrupted with a yelp and promptly hung up. Upon entering my room, I accidentally kicked a tennis racket I had left on the floor. I looked down and saw a foam finger I thought I had lost years ago, pointing at me as if it wanted me to leave. I hastily exited the room, texting my friend, "I'm just going to go. Bye, I'm fine, just tired." Their response was, "Okay, good night." I ended up sleeping on the couch. When I woke up, I found myself in bed, but the robe I had been wearing was on the couch, and the foam finger was on my desk. Everything on my desk was undisturbed. Wow, what a strange dream, I thought. When I went to school, my friend asked, "Dude, what happened? Why were you yelling and acting weird?" Confused, I asked, "How did you know I had a bad dream?" They responded, "What dream? You screamed and hung up on me twice." My friend showed me their phone, and I saw the text message, but it was different from what I remember. Instead of saying, "I'm just going to go, bye, I'm fine, just tired," which is what I recall sending, both their inbox and my sent messages said, "Okay, just need to stay out of my room." The strange part was that I had recently moved into that room. It was my dad's old office, and I preferred it on the ground floor. It was almost as if it was being evicted, but my inanimate objects. My uncle is a general surgeon in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. One time he shared the creepiest story I've ever heard. He was an intern working in the ER late one night with another team of doctors, desperately trying to save an elderly man's life. Despite his advanced age, the old man had an unusual amount of hair and bushy white eyebrows. He was on the brink of death, slowly fading away due to a severe heart attack. The doctors were in a frenzy to assist him when they received another urgent call. A couple of teenagers, likely intoxicated, had crashed their car into a guardrail in Winnipeg. The crash was severe, resulting in the driver and passenger in the front seat losing their lives. However, a girl sitting behind the driver survived but was in critical condition, clinging to life. The girl was rushed into the ER, and my uncle was instructed to leave the elderly man, whose chances of survival were diminishing rapidly. The girl's arrival shifted the focus of attention in the ER. She was bleeding profusely, and my uncle recalled that she briefly went into a coma for about 10 minutes. During this time, he was informed that his assistance was no longer needed for the girl, so he returned to the elderly man only to discover that the man had passed away. This is where the story takes an eerie turn. The following day, the girl miraculously stabilized. My uncle decided to take her and talk to her, driven by an inexplicable urge to ask about her experience during the coma. She described it as a strange, vast, and infinite dark space with only a distant speck of light. As she walked around it in the darkness, she encountered an old man sitting on a bench. She approached him, and all he said was that it wasn't her time, and instructed her to turn around. She followed his advice, and the next thing she knew, she woke up in a room surrounded by doctors. My uncle was taken aback and asked her to describe the old man. She replied, "He had white hair and big eyebrows. That's all I can remember, but his white eyebrows." This story has always stayed with me. He also shared another bizarre story about a man inserting a pepper grinder fully into his anus, but that's a tale for another time. So what do we think? Coincidence, hallucination, lack of oxygen to the brain, or a realm of experience and existence that we just can't comprehend? 20 years ago, when I was 8 years old and living in San Diego, California, my dad was in the Navy and we lived in military housing, I had an experience that has since given me a phobia of uncovered windows at night. It was around 2 a.m. and I was having a friend sleep over. We were in the living room playing with our Barbie dolls. The dining room and living room were essentially one large room, and in the dining room section, there were 3 floor-to-ceiling windows without any curtains or blinds. It made me uneasy, as anyone outside the windows could easily see us in the living room. I felt like we were being watched. When I turned my head to the right, I was met with a sight I'll never forget. Although it may not sound gruesome in description, it was terrifying to an 8-year-old. There was a man, a white man, wearing dark blue short-sleeved t-shirt with a chest pocket, revealing his hairy bare forearms. He had on a black ski mask and black gloves, with the face pressed up against the window. He watched us intensely, blocking out any glare from the streetlights. I screamed and curled into a ball, and my friend did the same. Sobbing, she asked what we should do. I suggested that we count to 3 and run upstairs to get my dad. We began counting, but I only made it to 2 before sprinting up the stairs. My friend followed closely behind. We burst into my dad's room in a state of hysteria, screaming about a man sitting at the edge watching us through the window. Without hesitation, my dad jumped out of bed and raced out of the backyard where the man would have been standing. By the time my dad arrived, the man had disappeared. Years later, I recounted this story to my mom, who lived in the area. She remembers hearing about a artist on the loose and that time in that area. To this day, I'm convinced that man at the window was the artist. I was sitting in the middle of my room on a quiet afternoon. My mom was outside chatting with my grandma, who lived next door. I sat alone in a chair about 8 feet away from the TV, which was turned off. An empty crystal jar sat on the TV, capturing my attention as I stared at it. Suddenly, the jar flew in a straight line across the room, and I felt it graze my ear, narrowly avoiding hitting me between my eyes. I turned my head to see tiny pieces of glass scattered on the floor. Strangely, I remained calm, and despite not understanding what had just occurred, the jar had collided with the wooden door of my closet. I glanced at both windows, and then stood up to inspect the entire room for any rocks or objects that someone might have thrown. I walked to the windows to check if they were open or broken. As I began to comprehend the situation, I rushed out of the room in search for my mom. All because of a dog named Muffin. Muffin, a Chihuahua Dachshund mix, born 13 months before me, initially sparked jealousy in my early years due to the attention she received. I pretended to be a dog, begging for scraps under the table and swiping her toys. She wasn't fond of me and even bit me a few times. However, as time passed, we became the best of friends. We took walks down my gravel road, and I confided in her as I didn't have many friends. For years, her presence was a blessing, from running around my acreage to comforting me in my low moments. She was well-mannered and never barked. Sadly, all good things must end. When I turned 14, 2 months later, Muffin fell ill, vomiting her food and growing thin. A stomach tumor was the grim diagnosis. It felt like losing a friend before she was gone. Despite months of treatment and a brief improvement, her health deteriorated, and it seemed we had to make the difficult decision. In my arms, Muffin quivered as she enjoyed her final moments. The vet prepared the needle, and she gazed at me without a struggle as it was delivered the ending of life antidote. My friend was gone forever. "Do you think dogs go to heaven?" I asked, my face buried in her dying fur. My mom nodded with tears in her eyes. About a year later, I had a dream. My house was dark with curtains hanging everywhere. Descending the stairs, I noticed a light and movement in the kitchen. But somehow, and that something caught my eye, a shining object in the dining room. It was a muffin. I knelt beside her and touched her luminescent body. "All good things must come to an end, my friend," she said in her characteristic voice. As she floated upward and vanished into the ceiling, I wept. Hands rested on my shoulder, offering comfort until I awoke, drenched in sweat at 3 a.m. An eerie peace settled over me, and I returned to sleep. A few months later, my sister dreamt of making food in the kitchen when she saw an apparition of Muffin and me weeping beside her. About a year later, my brother had the same dream. Though I had my entire family would share this dream, only my brother and sister have. I like to believe that my friend was bidding me farewell that night, and that indeed I will see my friend again someday. TLDR, a dog named Muffin brought jealousy but later became a cherished family friend before falling ill with a tumor. Strange dreams followed her passing, offering comfort and closure to the author and their family. I always appreciate a little dash of wholesomeness in the daily reads, and this was that. Sorry for your family's loss, but it would appear Muffin is still around in some way. About a year ago, my brother and I were reading an article on the internet at around 1 a.m. Our parents were asleep in their bedroom, which is right next to ours. Suddenly, we heard the loudest, most blood-curdling scream from outside. Honestly, that scream filled me with instant, unfathomable dread. The door to my parents' bedroom shook violently, as if it had been slammed shut. Naturally, this caused my parents to wake up in a panic. We all rushed over to the window near the source of the scream, and there was a woman with long hair and a white dress slowly walking up the street, crying and occasionally letting out a loud scream. My dad hurried outside to ask her what was wrong and if she needed help, but she just kept walking. Nevertheless, Dad decided to call the police. When they arrived a few minutes later, they found no sign of the woman. Recently, I heard the same scream at around the same time of night, although it didn't wake up my parents this time, and I was too scared to look out that window. I'm not sure if this was what I was witnessing. TLDR. At 1 a.m., we heard a dreadful noise, looked out the windows, saw a crying woman wandering aimlessly, called the cops for help, but they found no one.